Hello, everybody. Welcome to Holy Comforter Episcopal Church and our Fall 2020 Adult Christian Formation series entitled Liturgy, the Work of the People. I'm Jimmy Abbott, the priest at Holy Comforter Episcopal Church in Spring, Texas. And the idea behind this series is that in a time of social distancing, in a time when we are not doing our normal routines of liturgy and worship, we're able to step back some and ask some deeper questions about why we do the things that we do. In fact, that is the guiding question to the whole series. Why do Episcopalians do what we do when we gather on Sundays and other special days of the year in the presence of God? Of course, that is from Liturgy for Living, one of the supplemental resources and readings for you during this series. So today, I want to talk about people. We've talked about space, we've talked about time, we've talked about trying new things and traditions. Well, today I want to talk about people. Now, what we have to remember is that in the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, in the Catechism, if you want to turn to page 855, it's very clear. The ministers of the church are laypersons, bishops, priests, and deacons. Those are the four orders of ministry, and it's pretty obvious as to which one is first. Laypersons. Now, it's kind of funny in the Episcopal Church. Remember, the word Episcopal is taken from the Greek word which means bishop or overseer, so we are a church of bishops. I think there's some irony there that we are remembering and reclaiming that lay people are the primary ministers of the church, not the clergy, but lay people. I mean, think of this, of our liturgy and our worship services. As a priest, I could not do communion alone. It requires other people to be present. I mean, that's why we call it communion, meaning fellowship. Or think of baptism. Baptism requires that other people are present. Witnesses, godparents, sponsors. There is some sense there that there have to be other people present, that this is not just a one-horse show, that it's not just the priest sort of doing the things up at the front of the church and everyone else watching. Rather, everybody is participating and has their own role to play. You could even think of this as a play, of liturgy as a sense of theater, that everybody has their particular role to play, and without one of those people there, the whole thing doesn't make sense. So let's talk a little bit about what the four orders of ministry are and what they do. I know we're going off a little bit from the why and into the what a little bit. But you see there the primary order of ministers. You see a couple of parishioners at Holy Comforter giving one another communion. Well, that is our former seminarian, Rhonda Rogers, when she was still a layperson, giving communion to another parishioner. Again, if you look at this picture, you really just see lay people. I see one priest kind of way back there in the background. That is really important for us to remember, that the vast majority of the church is composed of lay people. It is lay people who are the primary ministers of the church. And they can do all sorts of fabulous things in the church. And really, I think when we get down to it, it ought to be the priests and the deacons and the clergy who are leaders, yes, but who are the ones in giving the resources and inspiring lay people to do their various ministries, both in the church and in the world. You see there a picture of Bishop Doyle banging on the front doors of the new church during the dedication service. Remember, the position of bishop is to be overseer, to be the chief pastor, preacher, and teacher of a diocese. And so his role is big. Remember, he also, or not in this instance he, but of course a bishop, male or female, is to confirm and to also ordain other ministers to assist in the sacraments. There's a picture of me from a long time ago. You can tell that our camera quality has gotten better, can't you? That's a picture of me at a baptism, lighting a little candle for a little baby. Isn't that really neat? But remember that I'm given the authority to baptize as a priest. I'm given that authority by the bishop because it is the bishop's primary responsibility to baptize. I, as a priest, am asked to share in that ministry with the bishop. Of course, my other duties are to celebrate the Holy Communion and to work in the church to help in the church's mission of reconciliation to the world. And there at the bottom you have Deacon Bob. You see him reading the gospel. That is one of the roles of the deacon in our liturgy. You also know that the deacon is responsible for setting the table. We oftentimes say that the deacon is the bridge between the world and the church, and that the deacon's role is to communicate the needs of the world to the church. That's why Deacon Bob does most of his work at Holy Comforter, not on campus, but out there in the world, and that is the deacon's role. So the idea, though, is with all four of these orders of ministry working together, shows the true strength of the church and also shows the great created diversity of God's kingdom and God's creation. That no one of us is alike, and each of us have unique callings within the church to serve God. Now, that changed some, at least our understanding of it changed, from the 1928 Book of Common Prayer to the 1979 Book of Common Prayer. How do you like this little graphic I just whipped up? Anyway, in the 1928 Book of Common Prayer, it was customary for the priest to be called the minister, and the only minister, and it was the priest who was responsible for doing just about everything in the church service, especially Holy Communion. The priest read all of the lessons, the priest said all of the prayers, the priest distributed all of the communion. Lay people, while participants, were not the active participants as much as they are today in the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, which, of course, as you know, in a Holy Communion service on a regular Sunday in an Episcopal church, lay people read the lessons. They are ushers. They help serve communion. They are very active in the worship life of the congregation. And that is a major shift from the 28 prayer book to the 79 prayer book. Now, why is that? It's really rooted in the baptismal theology of the 1979 Book of Common Prayer. There was a renewed focus on baptism in the 79 book. A lot of that was going back and reading some of the ancient liturgies from the early church, including a little book called the Didache. I know that the Didache is referenced throughout Liturgy for Living and in the theological commentary on the Book of Common Prayer, Praying Shapes Believing. And there was a renewed understanding going into the 79 prayer book that lay people are the primary ministers of the church, like I said, but that also baptism is not so much anymore the fire insurance against hell, but rather a commissioning into ministry. That is a pretty significant shift. So that meant that what was once a private event became part of the church's regular Sunday worship. So up until the 79 Book of Common Prayer, most Episcopalians were baptized in private ceremonies, oftentimes in people's homes. The minister, the priest, would come over to their home on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon and do the baptism privately. Of course, as you all now know, that's completely changed, and that we do baptisms publicly on Sunday morning. Of course, that's changed in this year 2020 during the pandemic, and we have reclaimed some of these other practices, and as a matter of fact, I'm doing a number of private baptisms on Saturdays because we are not able to gather in large corporate public bodies as we are used to. Now, we also say that if baptism is so important, then we must understand that lay people have a part to play in the church's worship too. That it's not just lay people are baptized and become part of the church, but if we really do say this is a commissioning into ministry, then there must be ministry for lay people to be part of. And if the church's primary ministry is worship of the Lord God, then of course there must be opportunities for lay people to serve in the church's public liturgies and worship. This, of course, has raised all sorts of questions about the relationship between clergy and people, and I think there's actually been a fundamental change in the relationship between clergy and lay people since the 79 Book of Common Prayer. You know, it used to be, up until the 79 book, that many priests like me were referred to as Mr. Abbot. I actually kind of like that, rather than a Father Jimmy or a Father Abbot. But I think now, with this change in the relationship between lay people and clergy, we've started calling our clergy different things. This also caused other questions to come up, just on a very logistical level. Why do we pay our clergy if we've all been baptized as ministers? I actually think it might be a pretty valid question and something that we ought to consider. If we really do say that the lay people of the church are the primary ministers who are called to pray, to do God's mission of reconciliation in the world, then why is it that we, clergy, are the ones who are mostly paid by churches? Of course, there are lay people on staff, but there's a sense that my vocation as a Christian is why I am paid by the church. Just a question that I think we ought to consider. And then another one is, why is celebration of the sacraments reserved for the clergy? Why is it that just priests and bishops can celebrate Holy Baptism and Holy Communion? Because, again, if lay people are the primary ministers of the church, how is it that these two fundamental core celebrations of the church are reserved for us? Now, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because I want you to struggle and to wrestle with them. And those are some of the questions that we will struggle and wrestle with at our live our live discussion on Zoom this Sunday, October 11th at 10 a.m. So I'm going to conclude with a question for you, a journal question. Why do you serve the church as a layperson? Why? Chances are you don't get paid for it. So why is it that you serve? I'd like you to journal on that question, to think about it, to ruminate on it, and that will also be one of the guiding questions for our discussion section this Sunday via Zoom. Of course, if you want to find a link to that, you can go to our website, holycomforterspring.org/events. I thank all of you for joining me in this, and we should just kind of note the irony of this, is that here I am, the clergy person, talking to you, the lay people. You know, this image here of the altar rail, I think it is something that is also real in our life. That there has become this distinction between clergy and people. I don't know what that's all about. And of course, I have my own reasons for serving the church as a clergy person, but I would love for you to talk about why you serve the church as a lay person. Again, thank you so much for joining me for this series, Liturgy, the Work of the People.